Did you know that much of what you've been told about the Roman Empire is a lie? It turns out, the Roman Empire probably happened 1,000 years later than the textbooks claim. Sounds crazy? Well, hold on to your togas, as we will show you that Pompeii was destroyed in the year. Wait for it. 1631 AD.
So when Pompeii and Herculaneum were discovered in the mid-1700s, two different civilizations should have been discovered. One from the 1st century and 17th century, right? When the official excavations began in 1748, the archaeologists claimed they had discovered only one civilization, the 1st century Roman one. Roman meaning fake, just as the Mali Empire was mapped by Europeans in the 1300s, but then erased from the narrative during the 1800s. Pompeii was mapped as a modern place and then pushed back 1,600 years to serve a European cultural identity. The Epitaph of 1631 in Tor del Greco is the smoking gun for anyone questioning the traditional timeline. It isn't just a memory stone. It is a massive government monument that contradicts 1,500 years of missing history. Commissioned by the Spanish Viceroy of Naples, it was placed on the main road from Naples to the volcano. The inscription describes the volcano's power. But the debate is the list of cities it claims were destroyed in 1631. The Latin text reads, Pompeios, Herculaneum, Octavianum, per strictus Reatrina et Porticu, Silva scit villas. The translation, Pompeii, Herculaneum, and other villas it has in a flash scattered, burnt, and destroyed. If these cities were active in 1631, we must ask, what else are they lying about?
Black history decoded.
As per the standard tale, Mount Vesuvius rained down its fiery wrath upon Pompeii in 79 AD, burying the city under layers of volcanic ash. Over time, Pompeii supposedly faded into obscurity during the Roman Empire's decline and the Dark Ages. It wasn't until 1763 that the city was identified as Pompeii, when a plaque with the city's name was discovered.
I found out about the 1631 Mount Vesuvius event late February 2026, and I bet most of you didn't know about this either. For the longest time, I suspected that our timeline has been manipulated, especially when they try to convince us of certain historical origins. Like when they claim that Adam and Eve, two white individuals, were the first humans on Earth. And they place them in our timeline around 4000 BCE. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It will really help out my channel. I intend to reveal a lot of hidden history. Now I am going to prove to you that Pompeii was much more recent. But I want to explain how Romang means fake. Roman Catholic Church means fake Catholic Church. For example, the White Madonna and Child is F-A-K-E, hence Roman Catholic Church. The original Catholic Church venerated the Black Madonna and Child way before the White Madonna and Child. This is why the origin and history of the Black Madonna and Child are ignored. I did a video on the origin of the Black Madonna and Child. You should check it out. Her situation wasn't supernatural. She turned a negative into a positive. They are well-known historical figures who existed in history. They are a huge part of Kemetic and Ethiopian history. Now let's look at Romanticism and fakeness. Romanticism was an intellectual, artistic, and literary movement that swept through Europe and the Americas from the late 18th century. I argue that it started well before that. For example, the Bible can be considered romanticism or romantic. To be romantic usually requires these three I's. First, imagination, overcoming the boring reality. Second, intuition, trusting feelings and instincts over logic. And third, idealism, the concept that we can make the world a better place through spirit and thought. Romanticism, as a broad cultural movement, is defined by making things better or more idealized than they actually were. A form of manipulation. A lot of the stories in the Bible are fantastical, romantic literature. Now, I do believe the Bible is based off of historical events, but the scholars exaggerated the details, changed the names and locations. For example, so-called Moses Eka Amenhotep IV, who did a mass exodus from Thebes, built a boat that parts the water as it travels, and people walking on dry land are people walking on the boat. Romanticism changes that. So-called Moses, or God, parts the sea, and the people walk on the dry land to get to the other side. See how that works? The logical, factual version is replaced with a fake version, romanticism. White culture loves romanticism. They have been telling their people and the world for centuries that blacks Africans are inferior, uncivilized, and have no significant history to speak of. Romanticism, it's the difference between a biography and a superhero movie. One tells you what happened. The other tells you how the storyteller wants you to feel about what happened. Not many people know about the 1631 Mount Vesuvius eruption. Why is that? It is absolutely a fact that the 1631 eruption is largely missing from the public consciousness. This historical amnesia isn't an accident. It is a result of how history is curated by the education system and the media. In Western schools, the curriculum typically jumps from the fall of Rome, 476 AD, straight to the Renaissance, 1400s, often skipping the 1,000 years in between and the early modern period, like 1631. By focusing heavily on 79 AD, educators reinforce the idea that the greatest parts of history happened in the distant classical past. This is the same mechanism we observe with Kemet. By focusing on a Mediterranean version of Egypt and ignoring the ongoing history of the Mali Empire or the Kingdom of Kush, the official narrative creates a version of history that serves a specific Eurocentric worldview. The archaeological bias. Archaeology as a science was born at Pompeii in the 1700s. The pioneers of the field were obsessed with classicism. If they acknowledged that 1631 was the primary event that shaped the ruins we see today, it would cheapen the discovery for them. They wanted to be finding ancient Rome, not last century's Naples. Today, if a tourist goes to Vesuvius, the gift shops are filled with 79 AD books. There's very little money to be made in telling people that the volcano erupted dozens of times, including a massive one just 100 years before the ruins were found. Why this ignorance matters. When people don't know about the 1631 eruption, they lose the ability to question the timeline. If you don't know 1631 happened, you have to believe the 1,600-year gap theory. If you do know about 1631, you start asking questions. Why do the maps show Pompeii in 1580? Why does the 1631 monument list it as a casualty? This is a classic example of historical erasure by omission. You don't have to burn the books. You just have to make sure no one writes new ones about the wrong events. So when Pompeii and Herculaneum were discovered in the mid-1700s, two different civilizations should have been discovered. One from the 1st century and 17th century, right? When the official excavations began in 1748, the archaeologists claimed they had discovered only one civilization, the 1st century Roman one. Roman meaning fake. Who writes history? If you look at the actual records from the 1700s, the discovery was a mess of contradictions that suggests they were digging through layers that didn't fit the 79 AD timeline. This is where the romantic distortion comes into play. The narrative pushed by the Bourbon kings of Naples, who funded the digs, was that they had found a time capsule from 79 AD. They ignored anything that looked too modern. They focused entirely on statues, coins, and frescoes that looked classical. This served their political goal. They wanted to be the new Romans, so they only publicized the old Roman finds. If 1631 is the original, the 1700s would have been digging through a Renaissance town, a 17th century settlement that sat directly on top of, or was mixed with, Roman ruins. Evidence that they found more than 1 century includes the modern art style. Many early visitors remarked that the frescoes looked like Renaissance paintings, featuring perspective, shading, and realism, rather than the flat, stylized art found in other 1st century Roman sites. Then there's the anachronistic tech. They found heavy glass panes and windows, and complex surgical tools that looked like they belonged to a 16th century barber surgeon, not a 1st century doctor. Even the inscriptions raise questions. Some of the Roman graffiti used Latin abbreviations common in the Middle Ages. Consider the 120-year gap of 1631 versus the 1,600-year gap of 79 AD. In 79 AD, the land supposedly sat empty and forgotten for 1,600 years. And nobody ever bothered to dig for the massive amounts of gold and marble known to be there. In 1631, the city was active until the eruption, and the discovery 120 years later in 1748 was just the government finally clearing the rubble. One requires a miracle of forgetting. The other is just standard human behavior after a disaster. The botanical evidence of Pompeii presents a mystery. There have been several inconvenient botanical finds that mainstream archaeology struggles to explain. Historians often use the Romanticism excuse to dismiss these anomalies, but the visual evidence within the ruins tells a much different story. Consider the pineapple fresco. There's a famous artwork in Pompeii that appears to depict a ripe pineapple sitting prominently in a basket of fruit. This is a profound anomaly because pineapples are strictly New World plants, originally native only to the tropical regions of South America. Mainstream historians claim it is just a weird-looking pinnacone or perhaps a topiary fruit that happens to look exactly like a modern pineapple. However, by the year 1631, global trade was well established. New World fruits like pineapples were already known and seen across the European continent. Then there is the maize pollen. Independent researchers have pointed to the discovery of maize or corn pollen trapped within the volcanic strata. Much like the potato, corn is an American crop. It officially did not arrive in Italy until the late 5th–10th century after the Atlantic crossings. The seasonal problem further complicates the timeline. For years, history books claimed the eruption happened in August, based on a letter by Pliny, but when archaeologists examined the actual biological remains, they found pomegranates and walnuts crops harvested in the autumn or early winter. They also discovered evidence of heavy wool clothing among the ruins. These items are strictly associated with colder months, not an August heatwave. The correction came eventually. Authorities moved the official date to October 24, 79 AD, to try and fit this growing mountain of physical evidence. But interestingly, a major eruption of Vesuvius occurred in 1631, specifically in December. This date fits the winter evidence even better than October. Moving to the clothing evidence, we see more contradictions. When archaeologists analyze the voids left by the victims, they notice something strange. Using plaster to create casts of the bodies, the texture of the drapery and the layers of clothing became clearly visible. Many victims were found wearing thick, heavy garments made of wool. This presents a massive problem for the traditional midsummer timeline. In the sweltering 100-degree Fahrenheit heat of a Neapolitan August, citizens would have been wearing the lightest linens possible. Instead, several bodies show evidence of wearing multiple layers of tunics. This is a classic behavior for surviving a chilly Mediterranean winter morning. The heavy layering and thick textiles suggest the inhabitants were protecting themselves from a cold December wind, not basking in the summer sun. If we re-evaluate history, the 1631 eruption aligns perfectly with the presence of winter fruits, wool clothing, and even New World botanical finds. The evidence suggests a timeline much closer to our own than previously thought, leaving us with a lingering question about the true past. As we look at these ruins today, we must wonder, is our history a solid record or a narrative waiting to be rewritten? The botanical winter evidence. It wasn't just the clothes. The food found in the markets and homes didn't match August either. Autumn or winter fruits. Archaeologists found carbonized remains of pomegranates, chestnuts, and walnuts. These are all harvested in the autumn. The wine dilemma. They found many wine jars or amphorae that had already been sealed. In Italy, the grape harvest and wine sealing process usually happens in October or November. If the eruption was in August, the grapes would still have been on the vines. Heating braziers. Many houses had charcoal burning braziers out in the main rooms. You don't keep a heater in the middle of your living room during an August heatwave. The 1631 eruption happened on December 16th. If you look at the evidence of heavy wool coats, pomegranates, and indoor heating through the lens of a December 1631 event, everything fits perfectly. You don't need to guess why people were wearing coats or why the wine was already sealed. It was a week before Christmas. The denarius was the standard silver coin of the Roman Empire from around 211 BCE until the mid-3rd century AD. However, when you look at the coinage through the lens of the 1631 timeline, some very inconvenient contradictions appear. In the official 79 AD story, archaeologists should only have found coins minted before August of that year. But the actual discovery records from the 1700s tell a messier story. Leaving the question, was Pompeii's fate sealed in the heat of August or the frost of December? Reports from early excavations found coins featuring emperors who lived centuries. After 79 AD, to protect the timeline, historians claim these were dropped by looters. It's the miracle of forgetting. They'd rather believe in clumsy looters than a recent eruption. In 1631, Naples was under Spanish rule. If Pompeii was functional then, the currency would be a mix of Spanish, Neapolitan, and local coins. When Bourbon kings funded the digs in 1748, they sought classical glory. Finding a 1620 Spanish silver reel would be labeled intrusive debris, while highlighting a Roman denarius to prove a time capsule. In the Renaissance, many Italian states used the word denaro, derived from denarius. If a document from 1600 mentions denarii, a scholar could easily relabel it as ancient Roman to push the timeline back. Many Roman coins found were in pristine condition. The 79 AD logic says ash preserved them. The 1631 logic says they were only a few decades old in 1748. By labeling everything as 1st century, the church locked the site into an ancient past. They used numismatics to turn a 17th century disaster into an ancient mystery. If the coins are from the 1600s, the Roman Empire, as we know, it starts to crumble. You're left with a history that is much more recent and much more suppressed by the record keepers in the Vatican.
Maps from the 1500s and 1600s depict Pompeii and Herculaneum as bustling metropolises, precisely when they were meant to be lost and forgotten until the 18th century. How on earth did that happen?
For centuries, the story of Pompeii has been set in stone, a city frozen in time by the catastrophic eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. But a trail of cartographic evidence suggests a mystery that challenges the very foundation of our historical timeline. What if the dates are wrong? Could the legendary destruction of Pompeii actually have occurred over 1,500 years later, during the massive eruption of 1631? The first anomaly is found in the Tabula Peutingeriae, an extraordinary 22-foot-long scroll illustrating the Roman Empire's road networks. Despite being updated well into the Middle Ages, the map clearly labels Pompeii and Herculaneum as active, functional coastal stops, not buried ruins. Imagine a 4th century traveler using this guide to navigate toward a thriving city that history claims was already deep under 20 feet of volcanic ash. It presents a logical inconsistency as jarring as a modern GPS guiding you to a bridge that supposedly collapsed centuries before your car was built. The mystery deepens in the 16th century with Abraham Ortelius, the renowned cartographer often credited with creating the first modern world atlas. In his 1570 map of the Kingdom of Naples, the city of Pompeii is unmistakably present, positioned precisely along the coastline of the Tyrrhenian Sea. This implies that for the sailors and tax collectors of the late Renaissance, these were not ancient myths but living, breathing coastal communities. Perhaps the most undeniable evidence is found in the heart of the Vatican, within the grand 120-meter-long Gallery of Maps. Commissioned in the 1580s by Pope Gregory XIII, these frescoes were intended to be the ultimate geographical record of the Italian peninsula. Yet, painted nearly 60 years before the 1631 eruption, Pompeii and Herculaneum are marked as existing cities, not archaeological sites. Records from 1631 describe a volcanic event of terrifying proportions, one that mirrors the classical accounts of Pliny the Younger almost perfectly. When we layer these historical maps over the traditional timeline, the anomalies become too frequent to ignore. Was our history rewritten? If these maps are accurate, the true story of Pompeii may have been hidden in plain sight for centuries. What else have we forgotten?
Check out this plaque from the 17th century near Naples. It commemorates the 1631 Vesuvius eruption and specifically mentions Pompeii and Herculaneum. I thought those names were lost in the Dark Ages.
Immediately after the 1631 disaster, maps were drawn to show what had been destroyed. The map by Mascolo, in 1633, in his book De Incendio Vesuvi, the scholar Giovanni Battista Mascolo included a map. This map shows the volcano's paths of destruction. The shocking detail: he labels the destroyed areas as Pompeii and Herculaneum. The logic is simple. If the cities were lost in 79 AD and not found until 1748, how did he know where they were in 1633? This looks like erasure? When you look at these maps through the lens of power, a pattern emerges. Phase 1. Pre-1631, the cities exist on maps because they are either living districts or well-known local ruins. Phase 2, 1631, a massive eruption buries the area, killing thousands. The scale of the catastrophe was absolute. Phase 3, 1748, the discovery is staged. The maps from the 1500s are ignored or called errors. This was done so that the find could be marketed as an ancient Roman miracle for a specific cultural narrative. just as the Mali Empire was mapped by Europeans in the 1300s, but then erased from the narrative during the 1800s. Pompeii was mapped as a modern place and then pushed back 1,600 years to serve a European cultural identity. The Epitaph of 1631 in Tor del Greco is the smoking gun for anyone questioning the traditional timeline. It isn't just a memory stone. It is a massive government monument that contradicts 1,500 years of missing history. Commissioned by the Spanish Viceroy of Naples, it was placed on the main road from Naples to the volcano. The inscription describes the volcano's power. But the debate is the list of cities it claims were destroyed in 1631. The Latin text reads, Pompeios, Herculaneum, Octavianum, per strictus Reatrina et Porticu, Silva scit villas. The translation, Pompeii, Herculaneum, and other villas it has in a flash scattered, burnt, and destroyed. If these cities were active in 1631, we must ask, what else are they lying about? Why this is a timeline crisis? If you follow the official history taught in schools, Pompeii and Herculaneum were buried in 79 AD and were lost and forgotten until their discovery in 1748. Therefore, in 1631, these cities should have been under 20 feet of dirt for over 1,500 years. The logic trap. Why would a 17th century government official list ghost cities from the Roman era as victims of a current disaster? The traditional explanation. Historians argue the viceroy was being romantic. They claim he knew from ancient books that these cities used to be there. So he added their names to make the 1631 eruption seem more epic and classical. The skeptical explanation, in 1631, thousands of people were dead and the economy was ruined. You don't use expensive stone monuments to play historical trivia. You list the places where your tax-paying citizens just died. This suggests that in 1631, Pompeii and Herculaneum were still the names of active local districts or towns. The Resina connection. The plaque mentions Resina, spelled Reatrina on the stone. Resina was the town that existed in 1631. When archaeologists started digging, under Resina in the 1700s, they found Herculaneum. If the 79 AD date is true, it means people built a whole new town directly on top of a buried Roman city, and lived there for 1,600 years without ever noticing the marble statues and gold jewelry just a few feet under their basements. If the 1631 date is true, it means Resina and Herculaneum were essentially the same place, and the ancient Romang label was applied later to distance the ruins from the 17th century. This plaque represents the moment before history was edited by the Romantic movement. In 1631, the locals knew exactly where Pompeii and Herculaneum were. They were just part of the neighborhood. By 1748, the official discovery narrative began. The 1631 plaque became an inconvenient truth. Today, if you take a tour of Pompeii, the guides almost never mention the 1631 plaque because it complicates the 79 AD brand. The most effective way to distort history isn't to burn the evidence, but to relabel it. By moving the date, they turned a recent tragedy into an ancient mystery, allowing European elite to claim the ruins as their own. Always do your own research. Like, share, subscribe, make a comment, and have a blessed day. Thanks for watching.